We are in a moment of conspiracy theory like I've never seen, and revisionism. They tend to go hand in hand in a way. You went on Joe Rogan show and caused it was a bit of a firestorm. Can I say it? It was a bit of a storm.
You can call it whatever you want.
Right. And you went on, incidentally, why did you not go on alone? I mean, everyone goes on alone, and you were paired with a comedian named Dave Smith, who's opposed to all of your politics basically in every way.
Yes, Joe would only have me on as long as he had his emotional support comedian.
Yeah.
He made it perfectly. I liked Joe. I've done his show a number of times. We've always had a good and interesting conversation, but for the last 2 years, he's, in my view, not had anyone on who's been able to really shed any light about either the war in Ukraine or the war in the Middle East, and has repeatedly brought on, comedians and others to shoot the shit about things they don't know about. And I was rather surprised at that, because I know the large number of people who said to Joe, if you want people who know about why the Ukrainians are fighting or why the Israelis are fighting, I can give you guests, I can give you young soldiers and heroes and victims and anything, and he wasn't interested in any of that. And he wouldn't have me on unless he had an anti-Israel person on as well, and that was obviously...
Is it the first debate that that he's had? I can't think of it.
I think it is the first debate he's ever had, and I had said to Joe beforehand, I don't think that's a good idea, because it would be a debate, and you're not a professional moderator, as it were. I mean, as you know, if you're going to do a debate, you need a moderator. And the moderator, you learn quite early in debating that the difference between a good moderator and a bad one. And I just thought, well, it's obviously not Joe's job to be a moderator, and that's not what he does, and it's very awkward and so on. But that was it. He wouldn't have me on without an anti-Israel person, and
he wasn't moderating either. He was jumping in.
Yeah, well,
not on your side.
No, he was jumping in on Dave Smith's side, Comic Dave, who has yet to tell a joke. But he made it very clear that was the only condition under which he'd come on. Only 3 or 4 days before I did that show, Dave Smith had been on again for like 3 hours, just alone with Joe, talking, shooting shit about Israel and so on. And those were the terms, and not very pleasant, but those were the conditions. Joe would only have somebody who was supportive of Israel's war struggle and supportive of Ukraine's war struggle if you had a comedian conspiracist.
So it reminded me of when I was in college that the university would only have conservative speakers if they were debating somebody, but you would have sort of lefty liberal speakers just giving lectures. I mean, I saw Noam Chomsky on campus, but if there was a similar right-wing person, they would have to have a debate.
Yes.
They didn't want to have those views out there kind of unfiltered and unchallenged.
Well, I imagine in the case of Joe, it was because he wasn't sure if he had the arguments to hand, and wanted somebody who putatively did. But yes, I mean, it was a very weird and I think slightly misrepresented exchange. I mean, it's always going to be difficult to do 2 against 1, which is what it was. But I think, as far as I can see, the thing that was what surprised a lot of people more was what was a totally misrepresented point I was trying to make, which I still hold on to, which is that I think that although everybody has a right to speak, and everybody has a right to hold their own opinions and voice them and so on, in the end there's a price to pay in a society for prioritizing know-nothings or thinking that the world's problems can be best solved by comedians.
In that exchange, the bit that was picked up by everybody was when you were talking about the border crossings. Can we play that clip that everyone seemed to hang on this one bit, and I want to get your reaction to it.
There was not starvation in Gaza after 2005. No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There was no deficit?
No, there are plenty.
No goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been.
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can. But you can travel.
This was the bit that everybody kind of honed in on. And I think that one of the reasons for it, I think there's two reasons for it. One is that there's so many people, particularly in the kind of Rogan world, that don't trust experts anymore.
Sure.
This is a person who is like deifying expertise, and look what the experts got us. This is COVID stuff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the other thing, which maybe you would agree with me on, is that the response to you on Twitter is like you're this like evil and Waugh type person who's mixed with some sort of Bond villain. So the way that you talk,
I hadn't seen.
It's like
the Evelyn Waugh bit. I'm perfectly willing to say.
No, well, I am too. But it was like this. Everyone's saying, "Well, have you been?" It was like there's something about the way. It's a Buckley-like thing, and the way that you talk is like Bill Buckley had to contend with. I mean, Sam Tannenhouse has a new biography of Bill Buckley. In every interview I've seen, they're like, "Well, why does he talk that way?" That was a part of it too. I saw endless commentary on the way that you spoke and the way that you said how.
I imagine. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, like everyone else, I use the voice I have.
But what do you say to that? I mean, the response, Dave Smith. I mean, he says something that I've said before. I've never been to Nazi Germany. I can talk about that. It's a fair point. But as you say, well, that's time travel, but you can actually travel and get on a plane. That seemed to really annoy people.
I mean, I don't care.
Yeah, I know you don't
care. But you
wouldn't have a career or a life if you cared about when people were annoyed by you.
Yeah, but I mean, there's in reply to both those points. Firstly, I said, I mean, these things, as you know, these things get cut up these days, and anyone can present anything they like in any way they like. What I said repeatedly was, yes, experts have let us down in recent years in very, very visible ways. And I gave the example of COVID. I gave the example of the lab leak. And there are any number of other examples you can give. That still doesn't mean that there is no such thing as expertise or no such thing as more or less informed opinions. And I would submit to anyone that if you are going into a surgery for work on your brain, and if you looked up and you saw a comedian about to operate on you, you would worry. Okay, medical expertise, clearly to some extent we still believe in. There are other forms of expertise we just are holding on to. And there are other realms of expertise which really do need to build up trust in themselves again. But that does not mean that just because that's the case, that we fall into this nihilistic hole of thinking that the world is a podcast studio in Texas. And the world's problems are best litigated by people who haven't traveled at all to places they're talking about. And again, I was rather surprised by, I mean, I don't really look at much reaction, but I was rather surprised by some people saying, oh my God, you're not meant to speak about a place or write about it unless you've been there. Is that the new rule now? How elitist? I was like, this is seriously not a contentious point to say that if you decide to spend all your time talking about a country and misrepresenting it, and you've never even been to it, that is a mark against you. Yeah. I mean, let me put it another way. Something like Comic Dave's position is akin to imagine if there was a Chinese journalist in one of the CCP papers who every week, in every day, wrote pieces about America, which pretended that America today is laboring under a situation in which it's absolutely the same as America in, say, the 1790s. That slavery still exists, that black people are enslaved by white people, and that is the law, and that's what's going on in America in the 2020s. Americans... and then we discovered, by the way, that the Chinese journalist in question not only didn't speak English, but had never been outside of China. We might think this person would do well to travel to America, to come here and see it for his or herself. And that person would certainly be a figure of considerable fun, because we'd know that they were just ignorant. They didn't know anything. They'd not been there. They just misrepresented things and formed views from exactly what sources. Well, it's the same with this. And journalistically, again, as I said repeatedly in that interview, and I've said many times in my career, journalists and the media have let everyone down very badly. We have, in our profession, we generally linger in realm of public trust somewhere between politicians and burglars, and in no particular order. And it is a job of journalists to try to reclaim some of that trust, for sure. But that does not mean that there are not journalistic standards. And one very basic journalistic standard is that, yes, if you are going to write about conflicts, you correspond, you report from the conflict. And I've done that for much of my life, and I find it about the best way I can get a grip on something I want to write about. And I'm sorry for the people who don't recognize that there is any virtue at all in first-hand reporting, first-hand experience, and much more. As for the kind of other stuff, I think there's just a bizarre playground world that Joe and others have, I suppose, encouraged. I have contempt for that, because, as I say, I don't think that the world is best litigated by comedians who are actually basking in ignorance. That's a real problem. I said many times in recent years, as all sorts of derangements occurred, that it was an odd thing that I, among others, felt that very often, I went to comedians for their politics and politicians for their comedy. But it was a sort of brief moment. And once the counterculture won, once the podcasters won, and actually were the media, were the voice of the media, became the top shows on, multiple platforms, then I think, to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you have the power of a platform with millions and millions of people viewing, I think you have a responsibility not to just pump shit into the system. And I think you should have some standards of basic hygiene. I try to point that out. And if the response of some people to that is, that's hilarious, let's go back and get more comedians to talk about stuff they don't know about, then I'm sorry for those people. But I'm not joining in that nihilistic project.
No, you've been on Bill Maher's show. And I remember the first time, a long time ago, when I was on, one of the producers telling me, don't do the thing where the comedians come on and try to be smart and you try to be funny, because
that is such a good note.
It is the best note you can get. And one of the things, the Chinese example is there's a real example of this too, and it's around the turn of the century, 19th and 20th. There was a very famous German writer named Karl May, who wrote. Hitler was a big fan of this stuff, but everybody was. There were westerns. There were the characters called Winnetou and Shatterhand, still very big in Germany. And Karl May was exposed by a newspaper for having never been to America. And it almost ruined his career. And I think he then went to America after to get the experience of being out in the great fruited plains and being able to write about this. But, look, as you say, if I am booking this show and it's about Ukraine, and I have two options, and I have one person that spent a year in Ukraine and one person who spent a year at their computer talking about Ukraine, I think I know which one I'm going to choose.
Right, and it's a basic standard. And as I say, I'm the only thing I'm bewildered about the backlash such as I know about from Rogan is that I'm bewildered that this is such a controversial point. I also, in the end, there's something else, which is just that, I'm somebody who believes in the power of books, in the power of ideas. Like you, I'm an omnivorous reader, a voracious reader, and am interested in things. I don't, in the final analysis, think that anti-literate, anti-ideas shitposting is a replacement for that world. And if somebody wants to contend with my views, I would urge them to read what I write. And I'm as I say, I'm a little bit surprised from Joe and others in that orbit that I think if Joe had spent the last 18 months reporting from the front lines of a conflict and seen what I've seen, he would be surprised if I decided not to read him and to laugh at him or do a school playground thing. And the truth is, I wouldn't do it.
I mean, that relationship is effectively over, I presume. I mean, have you been in contact with him since?
I don't like to break
codes of silence.
Personal.
Yeah. We didn't have to say what you said, but you have reached out, or somebody's reached out.
Yeah. I mean, I generally have a view that you never close the door entirely.
Yeah.
But I think that it's a great shame to me that he should have responded to what was a very clear effort to make an intervention about something in a way which is just schoolyard.
What I was surprised by is that he responded in the following episode, or a couple of episodes later, which about that "Have you been there?" Which I'd never seen him do either.
No, I mean,
I'm not a close student of Joe Rogan, but close enough that I would know.
It's just a shame to me. That's really, it's a shame to me because I and any number of people could push guests to him, could offer him guests who would be very stimulating and who know what they're talking about. You know, I literally, after that episode went out, a bunch of friends, soldiers that have been at the front lines in Ukraine and in Israel, reached out saying, do you think that I can go on Joe Rogan and correct what he thinks about this? He's not going to have them on.
There's something specific about Israel, too. I mean, I think Ukraine a bit, too, but I mean, you see this happening with Piers Morgan now, too. Theo Vaughn, the comedian who had Donald Trump on. It was a very good interview, by the way. It was the most human I've ever seen Trump when he was asking him about, he's like, you do the cocaine, what happens? And he's like, the interview turned around.
That was right. Really, Trump was very good on that.
It was very interesting, and I learned a lot from it. And then Theo Vaughn did a straight piece to camera about Israel. And
which, I'm sorry, once again,
it's fine, do it.
He's crying, or starting to cry and saying, how can this go on our watch? And he says, and correct me if I get this wrong, but as I recall, when he said this thing of like, there's a genocide, the Israelis are doing a genocide of the Palestinians, and he says, and he's like tearing up, and how can this happen on our watch in our lifetimes? And he says, I mean, I'm not a geologist, but...
Well, I mean, there's some rocks to be found under the rubble.
I've got to hit this point again. Sorry if I'm beating a dead horse, but we cannot have people as stupid as that dominating the discourse unharassed. It's just intolerable. This is how massive lies get pumped out. They get pumped out because very clever people have the ability to manipulate very stupid and easily manipulatable people, and then the lies just boom. And that's what we've seen. We've literally seen it in recent weeks in relation to Israel. We have had, and I'm confident enough about this again because I've seen a lot of this. I've witnessed it. I've spoken to so many people, but we've actually seen claims that are preposterous, and they get pumped out by UN agencies, the BBC, MSNBC, USA Today, and then a bunch of podcasters jump on it, and in order to maximize clicks and therefore profit, will always take it a much further step. I mean, one of the things that people outside this business do not realize is the extent to which, if you're making money on the clicks, there are certain things that will always work. And one of them is ramping it up about the Jews. There are other ones. If you say, if you do something about, I don't know, secret pedophile rings in pizzerias in Washington, you can do it as well. But
I mean,